There's a warning in the wind that comes wailing through the trees, a depression in the shoreline left by the pounding seas. There is a lesson in the drought that brings a country to its knees in these times. We are dancing with disaster when we live beyond our needs and pretend our hungry souls are not related to our greed. Life's a journey, but it's not about the speed in these times. In these times, we must be mindful of the gift. In these times, use our hands and hearts to lift the fallen spirit in this land, planting flowers in the sand, reaching out a helping hand in these times. As the perfect storm approaches and the gale around us roars, no longer can we close our eyes or hide behind our doors. Our choice is fewer now by what we've chosen to ignore in these times. The ship of state has drifted and it's getting hard to steer. It's a complicated issue, but the direction's pretty clear. And each of us is who we need to get to there from here in these times. Ooh, in these times, we must be mindful of the gift. In these times, use our hands and hearts to lift the fallen spirit in this land, bringing water to the sand, reaching out a helping hand in these times. In everything that's living, there is a promise of a love planted in the seeds below and in the stars above. We must listen to its promise, become faithful stewards of these times. Oh, in these times, we must be mindful of the gift. In these times, use our hands and hearts to lift the fallen spirit in this land, planting gardens in the sand, reaching out a helping hand in these times.
Okay. Thank you, Noel. Thank you. I was just going to say, I've never watched him sing from the back before. It's incredible to see the vessel that voice emanates from and the work it's doing. I mean, thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for being here, especially on a hot day like this. This is an important moment for all of us, and to have you here, to have you all part of this and participating, and adding your ideas and your voices is really, really important. I want to thank a few other people. Oh, by the way, I'm Rob Shetterly. I'm on the committee that's put this together, although I'm a pretty much of a minor part. I'm your moderator. I want to thank the Reversing Falls team. Tony Ferrara, Ann Ferrara, Joan McCracken, somewhere they're all here. They put this together, and particularly Tony, who spent months and months and months arranging for all the speakers, making sure this thing was going to happen. And he's just done an extraordinary job, and please give him some applause. Thank you. Oh, there he is. he's right there. I want to thank the Maine Community Foundation, Tradewinds Marketplace, Scholars Strategy Network, WERU, and the whole crew at GSA. You know, George Stevens gave us their space for the day. This has been a huge gift to us and to all of us. And I want to really thank them. There are, in your programs, you can see that there are many, many other sponsors. I just wanted to list the ones who gave us the biggest gifts. Also, Liberty Graphics donated these shirts that all the volunteers are wearing and the speakers. And there are more than 50 other volunteers who helped put all this together. And you're about to hear an eclectic bunch of voices, punctuated particularly by young people. But first, I want to just say something about what this is about. Because so many of you have posed important questions in your registration forms about what the climate solutions are locally and globally, I want to say a few words about the intent of this conference. It's meant to be a beginning. It's meant to help build an inclusive economic and social community which will initiate and sustain long-term change among ourselves and their communities. It's meant to be a mirror for our urgency. It's meant to recognize that the energy systems by which we are all embedded in now will soon be seen as the relics of one of history's disastrous wrong turns. It's meant to be a celebration of joy, courage, and mutual support. It's meant to be an acknowledgement of the responsibility and power and determination we know we must assume. It's meant to be deeply and honestly instructive. It's meant to present a kaleidoscope of ideas and feelings which will include anger and grief, science and action. It's meant to underline that we are all in this together. It's meant to prepare us for tough times. Tim Seeley, the master of George Stevens, is not able to be here today, but he wrote a statement, a welcoming statement for all of us. Ann Ferrara is now going to read Tim's statement.
In the words of Tim, I am quite sorry that I cannot be here to welcome you all. I am excited to have the Climate Convergence Conference take place at George Stevens Academy. Me, this is a perfect example of a school like GSA, a town academy, fulfilling its mission, collaborating and partnering with its community to do something important with students at the center. This conference itself, it represents a convergence, the convergence of a school, its students, and the larger community around something of importance, seeking truth and betterment for the world. One of my favorite essays is Thinking Like a Mountain by Aldo Leopold. If you have not read it, please do. My mind, in a very few words, it expresses the heart of an environmentally enlightened perspective. We must remember that the consequences of our actions will echo and reverberate long after we, in short-sightedness and ignorance, make a choice for easy comfort and wealth. The essay speaks of how, in a desire to make a place safe for cattle and deer, people killed wolves by the score. With no wolves to cull them, the deer increased. They in turn ate everything, making the range unsuitable for either them or cattle and subject to erosion. People thought of short-term gain to their and the land's sorrow. We hear a wolf's howl or contemplate the convenience of fossil fuels and think, what is best for me right now? My limited perspective. But we ought to think larger than ourselves. We ought to think of the planet as a whole and of future generations. As Leopold says in his essay, speaking of the mountain's view of what it means to kill off the wolves, behind our obvious and immediate hopes and fears, there lies a deeper meaning, known only to the mountain itself. Only the mountain has lived long enough to listen objectively to the howl of a wolf. The cowman who cleans his range of wolves does not realize that he is taking over the wolf's job of trimming the herd to fit the range. He has not learned to think like a mountain. Hence, we have dust bowls and rivers washing the future into the sea. We all strive for safety, prosperity, comfort, long life, and dullness. The deer strives with his supple legs, the cowman with trap and poison, the statesman with pen, the most of us with machines, votes, and dollars. But it all comes to the same thing, peace in our time. A measure of success in this is all well enough, and perhaps is a requisite to objective thinking, but too much safety seems to yield only danger in the long run. Perhaps this is behind Thoreau's dictum, wildness is the salvation of. Perhaps this is the hidden meaning in the howl of the wolf, long known among mountains, but seldom perceived among people. Thank you for coming, and thank you to all who have organized this. The words of Tim Seeley, headmaster of GSA.
There's always a glitch. So we're going to alternate speakers between people making statements and people also offering solutions. And this will be going back and forth. And our first speaker is a 13-year-old girl from the Friends School down in Cumberland. And it's Anna Siegel. And she's come up here this morning to speak to us. She has become, in the last couple of years, one of the foremost voices, not just for children, but in the whole state around climate issues. Anna.
Hello, my name is Anna Siegel, and I'm a rising 8th grader at the Friends School of Portland. I am also the Maine state lead from U.S. Youth Climate Strikes, but not too long ago, I didn't have that description. It was only 6th grade when I became involved in climate action. What I know has changed. The world's understanding of climate science has changed, from the 2018 IPCC report or the effects of youth striking worldwide. What stays the same is the urgency of the climate crisis. That is why I'll be reading to you today a poem I wrote in 6th grade for my first ever delve into the world of environmental activism. Back then, my hands were shaking and I didn't know how to speak into a microphone. Shortly after that experience, public speaking became a regular activity. Now I stand here with no nervous butterflies, my head high, but my poem has the same meaning. It is entitled Icarus. Here we are, soaring. This planet is on our wings, nestled on gleaming feathers, our responsibility, our trust. We swoop and dive, spiraling closer and closer to the heat, the searing brightness. If your children's children ask you about what happened, how we failed, tell them. Tell them about how we were Icarus, flying too close to the sun. Show them the horror as our feathers fell, one by one, scorched and lifeless. Tell them how our planet, Earth, mimicked their fall, and ask them, who will be there to catch it, build new wings, before the delicate glass balance of our Earth is shattered, broken? Maybe not. Maybe what you tell future generations is the story of how Icarus listened to his father, listened to the voices, unified, screaming, "Save our planet," and we carry Earth on our wings once more. Free as the birds soaring outside, from the smallest chickadees and wrens to the golden eagle. Which joy will you choose? How will you fly this planet? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Philip Osgood talking about the Citizens Climate Lobby.
So my name is Philip Osgood. I live in Brooksville. That was incredibly inspiring, a climate activist since 6th grade. I'm a little bit older than that, and after being quietly and not so quietly upset about what we're doing to our nation, what we're doing to our planet, I finally said it's time to get off my butt and do something. And the issue I decided to focus on is CO2 emissions, CO2 in the environment, which I think is the major cause of global warming. And I heard a talk about Citizens Climate Lobby and the legislation that's in the House of Representatives now, and I decided to jump into the deep end of the pool, as I sometimes do. I signed up to go to Washington, D.C. for their international conference for a week, being with 1,500 other people from all over the country, learning about lobbying, policy, climate change, CO2 emissions, CO2 mitigation, and it culminated in a day where 900 of us went to the Hill. We visited every senator's office and every representative's office except for maybe 5 out of the 520 some. And while we didn't get that legislation passed, support is growing, and it just felt so good to be with a group of people, young and old. There were over 400 students. There were elderly people. On my visit to Jared Golden's office, we had an 8th grader with us who spoke up, and it was just a very affirming experience. If you'd like to learn more about carbon mitigation, the legislation, Citizens Climate Lobby, there's a table here today, and there's going to be a breakout session. And if people are interested, I'd be interested in starting a local organization here to learn more about these issues and to work for comprehensive legislation to do significant work to mitigate these problems. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Philip. Well, that's what it takes. You know, it takes somebody, as Philip said, to get off his butt and get involved like that. And find how exciting and fulfilling it is to start engaging in that way, and also how much effect one can have. Next, we're going to hear from Magnolia Vandiver. Will be a junior here at George Stevens, and she's going to be reciting, somewhere in between, a poem by Richard Wilbur called Advice to a Prophet.
Thank you. Thank you. So, as Rob said, I did not write this poem. I'm not as awesome and original as Anna. I've always loved this poem, but I wanted to read it today because searching through many climate change poems, I've noticed there are so many wonderful poems, and some of them, people are blaming other people for climate change. It's the older generation, it's the younger generation, it's the rich, it's the poor. And what people don't really want to say is it's all of us. It really is. And it's hard for all of us to stomach that. But it really is all of us. And the upside of that, you could say, is if we're all part of the problem, each one of us can do something. And this poem sort of speaks to that. This is, again, Advice to a Prophet by Richard Wilbur. When you come, as you soon must, to the streets of our city, mad-eyed from stating the obvious, not proclaiming our fall, but begging us in God's name to have self-pity, spare us all word of the weapons, their force and range, the long numbers that rocket the mind. Our slow, unreckoning hearts will be left behind, unable to fear what is too strange. Nor shall you scare us with talk of the death of the race. How could we dream of this place without us? The sun, mere fire, the leaves untroubled about us. A stone look on the stone's face? Speak of the world's own change. Though we cannot conceive of an undreamt thing, we know our cost. How the dreamt cloud crumbles, how the vines are blackened by frost, how the view alters. We could believe, if you told us so, that the white-tailed deer will slip into perfect shade, grown perfectly shy. The lark avoid the reaches of our eye. The jackpine lose its knuckled grip on the cold ledge, and every torrent burn as Xanthias once, its gliding trout stunned in a twinkling. What should we be without the dolphin's ark, the dove's return, these things in which we have seen ourselves and spoken? Ask us, prophet, how we shall call our natures forth when that live tongue is all dispelled, that glass obscured or broken, in which we have said the rose of our love and the clean horse of our courage, in which beheld the singing locust of the soul unshelled, and all we mean or wish to mean. Ask us whether with the worldless rose our hearts shall fail us. Come demanding whether there shall be lofty or long-standing when the bronze annals of the oak tree close. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Well, that was recited beautifully. I recommend, because the language is so beautiful and the metaphors so important, look it up on the internet. It's there. You can read it yourself several times. Next, we're going to hear from Hans Carlson from the Blue Hill Heritage Trust, the organization which has made, over the years, such an incredible impact on the geography and the continuity of this community. Hans Carlson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming this morning. This is quite the turnout. Loudly is not my. All right. I guess I'm holding the microphone. So we've already heard a lot of really good words this morning. Our actions will, in fact, reverberate down through the ages. It is all of us, right? And the immediate issue at hand today is an overabundance of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But as the Greek myth tellers knew, the real problem is, as it always has been, a buildup of human hubris in the way that we live on this planet. The science is in. There's no debate anymore in terms of what the issue is and what the results will be if we don't act. And so action is, in fact, our next step. And that is an incredibly daunting task because the whole thing seems so huge and hard to wrap your mind around. So I'm going to tell you a story quickly. Just before I came up to take this job in Blue Hill, I was the director of a place called Great Mountain Forest down in northwestern Connecticut. And one of the last things I did before I left there was to help the head forester, a guy named Jody Bronson, to help plant a tree in his neighbor's front yard. And the neighbor, whose name was Bert, and I can't remember his last name, was 93 years old. And the tree in his front yard had blown over, and he was an old forester, and he was going to, by God, plant a tree. And we had a long conversation about the fact that he was 93 years old and that he was never going to see shade from that tree, and that if I came back and visited when I was 93, maybe I'd get a little bit of shade. But he was very clear in his thinking, like somebody has to start the process, right? If nobody does it, then it'll never happen. And I think that's what we all have to realize, is that there are thousands of little solutions to the issue at hand here, and it's really not a matter of which ones you do, as long as you do some of them, one or two of them at any rate. Let's talk about planting trees just for a second. We at the Trust have, over the last couple of years, conserved about 4,000 acres of big block forest land in Surrey and Ellsworth. Yeah, we're kind of proud of that. And we are going to be growing trees on there for a long time. Both of those properties were cut, one of them quite hard, the other one not so much, but we're going to be growing trees on those. And those are going to be, those trees, the trees that we'll manage, the trees that we'll plant, the trees that we'll let grow on their own, are going to be a tiny fraction of the estimated trillion trees that human beings could plant on this planet on unarable land that has not been developed. 1 trillion trees on this planet would, in fact, have a huge effect on the CO2 levels in the atmosphere. What we will be able to do over the course of the next 100 years in Surrey Forest and Meadowbrook Forest will be a tiny fraction of that, but that's our part, and that's the point. I think, well, back in the day, back in the 90s, the buzz was think globally and act locally. It's almost become a cliche. I think maybe we got that backwards. I think acting locally is the first step, and then thinking globally after that. That gives us all a course of action here in this room. So I think that's my good news story. Let's go out and do something. This is a serious problem, but we can do something about it. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call Magnolia back now. She's going to read a poem by a fellow student, Anna Trowbridge, who cannot be here today. This poem is called "You Shall Reap What You Sow."
So obviously I am not Anna Trowbridge. She really wanted to come today, but couldn't, so I'm reading her poem. She wrote this last year, and of course she's very humble about it, but I think it's a wonderful poem. So without further ado, You Shall Reap What You Sow by Anna Trowbridge. Why did you do it? What good did you think could ever come from this? It's like killing your own mother, the one that shaped you out of the bounty of her body. It's like the giving tree, the one who poured out all her love and hope and life into you down to the last drop, only to receive cold-blooded destruction in return. How can you still deny the brutal reality we have brought upon ourselves? When you learn that 200 species of plant, insect, bird, and mammal go extinct every 24 hours. When you see the smoke, the scab-like smog and grayness where once was green. How can you still say, I am in the right? How can you still say, it's all a hoax? Look around you. We are destroying our planet, and so far, it's the only one we've got. So when you see fish lying belly up in the oil-scummed water, when you see pipes stretching like greedy fingers into the once blue sky, spewing thick blackness into the atmosphere, when you hear stories of how it was in the old days, when you could safely drink right out of the stream, when the ocean's bounty was not disintegrating because of us, when Earth's life had balance to it. How can you say that this is all make-believe? We were given a vast, diverse, astonishing jewel to make our home upon, but we forgot how alone we are. We forgot to ask, if the time comes, who will save us from ourselves? Instead, we wasted with disregard, scouring Earth's bounty dry. We, the human race, are affected with a deadly case of hubris. And every time we deny, we take a step closer to our grave. Every time we praise the beautiful, clean coal, we slide closer to the edge of a chasm from which we will never return. And every time we poison the waters, flatten the mountains, tear our forest limb by limb, fill the sky with smoke, we take away from our children, our children's children, and all future generations who will say, why did you do it? What good did you think could possibly come from all this? Thank you. That again was Anna Trowbridge.
Read that so beautifully. Are there any politicians in this room? Where is Sarah? Would you stand up? A couple. Fantastic. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if we heard words like that coming from politicians? Oh, there she is. Hi, Sarah. I want to just take a great quick little break here for some housekeeping. Those of you who have signed up for particular workshops, when you probably looked this morning at the schedule and maybe thought, oh, I'd rather go to something else, you can do that. I mean, you can go there, and if it's not over full, take the other one, and just abide by the capacity. By the way, the Esther Wood room is in the door in the wall right over there. The library is upstairs and then around to the right. The classrooms for the other ones are just down the hall here to the right. Bathrooms are outside on either side here. If somebody needs it, there's an elevator to the second floor. I'm not sure who we talked to find the elevator.
Right across from the registration.
Oh, it's right over here. There'll be about 10 minutes between the workshop sessions, so please try to be punctual. It turns out there are extra bag lunches. If somebody didn't bring a lunch and wants one, we should have extra ones, but they are saved for ticket holders too. And there are water fountains around the corner there and also out here. So now, by the power vested in me as your moderator-in-chief, I will now recognize myself for a few minutes to share some of my own thoughts. And I want to begin with Gauguin's great painting, which asks the questions, where do we come from, who are we, and where are we going? Dinosaurs lived 200 million years on this planet, and my guess is they never felt the need to ask, much less had the ability to ask those questions. And we can be pretty sure they never questioned nature's laws. What finally killed them was not arrogance or failure to evolve, they were actually very good at that, but an enormous asteroid. We humans have existed in our present incarnation for about 100,000 years. We are clever enough, conscious enough, and curious enough to ask those mysterious questions, and clever enough to shapeshift ourselves into our own asteroid. Previously, those questions, who are we, where are we going, were philosophical musings. Now, survival demands their answering. Before proceeding, I want to honor this land, the indigenous land of the Wabanaki. Not simply the land of the indigenous people, but all indigenous species, which is to say it is not merely the land stolen from native people, but the land inhabited by all other species whose habitats, health, populations, relationships, and evolved wisdom have been invaded, disrupted, and diminished. That recognition is crucial. Some people call the genocide of native people this country's original sin. But implicit in that genocide was the positing of a reality based on the white ownership of the land. An implicit right to exploit it for profit, an assumption that our desire to create an economic reality separate from nature's was not only possible, but good and ordained by God. Eric Ries, his portrait is down there, is a poet, a professor, and an anti-coal activist from Kentucky who said, our most modern sin is that we have not loved the world enough. We have exiled the holy from this realm so that we might turn its mountains into money. A sleight of hand causing rainforest and species to disappear, then reappear as numbers on spreadsheets, a profusion of dollars for billionaires. That's actually quite easy. What we can't do is change nature's laws. That's impossible. So it's a mistake to think that original sin was eating an apple God said not to. And those other sins, native genocide and slavery, those were symptoms. The great philosophical mistake was indulging the appetite to consume the tree, the whole tree, the tree of life, with a feeling of both justification as well as satisfaction. During the Vietnam War, Muhammad Ali chose personal belief and dignity over fighting in that immoral war. He said, I have nothing to lose by standing up and following my beliefs. We've been in jail for 400 years. All of us here today have also been in jail for 400 years. The jail of propaganda, the jail of false narrative, the jail of failing to see the most obvious and simplest thing, that we survive on this tiny speck in space at the mercy of the laws of nature and its bounty, and in direct proportion to the health of all other species. We have called this jail freedom, the exalting of personal and irresponsible freedom to destroy the common good. Not merely the environmental commons, but the social, political, and moral commons too. It's the freedom of Ahab, wrapped and bound to the side of the great whale in the tangled ropes of his own harpoon. In a lust for dominance, power, and profit, Ahab attacked the whale and disappeared into the deeps with it. James Baldwin said, "People who shut their eyes to reality simply invite their own destruction." So, why are we here today? We're here to get real. We will be real. We will be authentic to the degree we engage the realities of our time. Every one of our past 11 presidents, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama, and Trump, was informed of the looming climate crisis and publicly stated how serious it was. And every one of them expanded fossil fuel exploration and use. Some might say we, as adults, are acting like indulgent children. But actually, as was made clear by Magnolia and Anna, and you'll see other young people later, the child-adult relationships have been inverted. It's the children who rightly scold the adults. It's the children who insist on reality. The children who must rescue adults from their addiction to fairy tale and fantasy. It's the children who know it's past time to leave the playroom. So we ask, like Gauguin, where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? But we must also ask, who will save us? Well, we will. We will, of course. No deus ex machina is streaking through the cosmos like a shooting star to come to our rescue. No climate superhero will punch the CO2 villain out of the galaxy. The rescue will be Deus Incardium, the God in our hearts, where we find our courage, our community, our compassion, our love, our humility, and our joy in working together and our deepest connection to all life. Mary Oliver, in her great poem, One or Two Things, says, "The God of dirt came up to me many times and said, so many wise and delectable things. I lay on the grass listening to his dog voice, crow voice, frog voice. Now, he said, and now, and never once mentioned forever, which has nevertheless always been like a sharp iron hoof at the center of my mind. But to lift the hoof, for that you need an idea." We have convened today to examine ideas to lift that iron hoof. We have some good ideas, but none of them is good enough by itself to lift it. Archimedes said, "Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand, and I can move the world." Together with all of us using our full weight on the long lever of our courage, our ingenuity, our tenacity, and our aspiration for the common good for ourselves and all species, we can move it. We can free ourselves from the centuries of imprisonment of false narrative. We can cut ourselves free from the tangle of our own ropes on the flank of the great whale, freeing both ourselves and the whale. The hierarchies and patriarchies of habitual leadership have failed us. Our model of military dominance has become an obscene exercise in war promotion for the purpose of war profiteering. The Pentagon has the largest single CO2 footprint in the world. Patriarchy and militarism rest on dehumanization, and they have dehumanized us. We have become our own other. Let's embrace the process of recovering our humanity and embrace it equally with all people and plants and animals of the world. That's our mission, that's our hope, that's our responsibility. There is only one sure way to free ourselves from anger, fear, and despair. That's to inspire ourselves with our own persistent, courageous commitment to change. Thank you very much. So we're going to start our first set of workshops, and you have now a few minutes to sort yourselves out and reconvene in those places. Maybe get to go to the bathroom, get coffee, munch on something, and then go to the places I mentioned before. Thank you for coming today. It's wonderful.